that is what most people are interested in, is good ammunition. You have to get used to the sights.
Now, there are some rarities.
That would be the most difficult gun to find.
What makes the Carcanos so controversial?
It was the gun that was used in the assassination of a U.S. president. There's a lot of holes in the story.
Un fucile in mano, in trincea solitario, l'anima al fronte, un soldato che combatte tra spari e rumori, la guerra dei corpi con il Carcano in mano.
Hey guys, Dan here with Battlefield Curator
And TheKoba49.
and TheKoba49.
Yep, thanks for having me, Dan.
We are going to discuss the controversial Carcanos. What makes the Carcanos so controversial?
A lot of misconceptions about the gun. The fact it was fairly obsolete and stayed in service because politics, governments, and lack of money. It got a bad rep, in the collecting community.
Yeah, I've seen so many people hate on their Carcano. It's incredible how much a military surplus rifle can get so much hate. But I think it might actually be a little bit more important in history than some other military surplus rifles. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you can't say it, but I think the biggest thing is it was the gun that was used in the assassination of a U.S. president, which brought it to the forefront in an unusual way that really inspires technology in that, or development of firearms. Had nothing to do with it.
Yeah, and that's one of the big controversies surrounding the Carcanos. But when you look back in history, it's a rifle that was developed in a smokeless powder cartridge by the Italians. Back when smokeless powder was pretty new. And not only did the Italians develop this rifle in a smokeless powder cartridge, this was the first smokeless powder cartridge rifle that the Italians would use. It was also in the first 6.5 caliber. Other countries were using larger calibers.
Some countries did adopt 6.5s. The concept was to have a smaller, lighter rifle with less recoil with the new technology of smokeless powder.
So the other 6.5s out there are the Swedish Mausers, and then you have the Japanese. 6.5, I guess it kind of went away for a little while, but then it came back in your Creedmoors and your...
Right.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was... The Dutch developed it.
That's right. And,
the Swede... Actually, Mauser is the one, the Swedish Mauser.
Yeah.
Mauser developed that cartridge. And these other ones, like the Carcano was proprietary. The Italians developed everything. The case, the bullet, the whole 9 yards. And as a hunting cartridge, the 6.5 Mannlicher-Carcano has been a popular hunting cartridge to this very day. You can still find sporting rifles.
Still used.
In that, yes.
Interesting. Even later on, you saw innovative developments with the Carcanos, such as the integration of a short rifle when a lot of other militaries were using a fairly longer rifle for their standard service rifle. The Italians used the M38 short rifle as their primary service rifle, short-lived, but it was a concept because they realized that most engagements were happening at around 300 meters. With that, they also developed the intermediate cartridge 735.
Yes. Well, the concept of the shorter rifle is something that everyone developed when they realized that smokeless powder, you don't need the longer barrels for the powder to burn. And then after World War I, with trench fighting, they decided, and again, with the Italian Carcano, they kept the same weapons platform because it was tried and true. They just started shortening the rifle. And after World War I, rifles were shortened. Then they started making PS-size carbines. But then they decided that the 6.5 cartridge ballistically, compared to what everyone else was fielding with modern, was insufficient. So a quick fix and an easy way to do, much like what the Austrians did with the M95s, where they rechambered it to a different cartridge that was more ballistically effective. They decided to rechamber, take worn out 6.5 barrels and rebore them to a 7.35 caliber, which the difference is 268 to 0.301 or 302 of the groove. So they could take a worn out barrel, re-rifle it to a bigger diameter, and then just you can actually make 7.35 brass from 6.5 brass with the dies, because all you have to do is expand the neck out. It's the same cartridge,
Interesting.
just with a larger diameter bullet, which was a cost-saving method.
Yeah.
That's where they came up with the cartridge. But then they decided with the M38, and again, late before the start of the next war, they simplified the gun with a fixed sight, tried to cut costs like a lot of World War II weapons were more simplified from the earlier versions, made it to where the one gun fits all was, and with the folding knife bayonet, it replaced the cavalry carbine, the TS, and the long rifle. But unfortunately, when they did this, changing the caliber and the gun, it was too much when the war broke out. So even though they kept producing the 38s, they were just produced in the 6.5 caliber, which I think out of all the Carcanos, that was the premier or the final achievement of developing the gun to where it was fairly useful. And they're a nice gun, they shoot well.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. And if you've not shot a Carcano, let's give you some Carcano shooting footage. All right, this is a Carcano M1891, and this is an M-block clip loaded with 6 rounds. Let's see how she does. I definitely enjoy shooting Carcanos. I take them to the range a lot. I don't know about you.
Oh, yeah, I do.
So how did you get into Carcano collecting?
That took place kind of later in life. When I was younger, I would buy all different types of military surplus guns. And I did have a M38 in 7.35 that I bought at the Albany Gun Show when I think I was 17 or something. But I had some original ammo, fired the ammo, hundreds of rounds. And after that, the only place you could, they didn't make, Norma didn't make 7.35. They made 6.5 ammo. I paid like $40 for the gun, but Norma ammo was imported, was $20 a box.
Oh, wow.
So I held on to it for a while and traded it up into something else. And when I got into doing a lot of custom reloading for obsolete cartridges, that's when I started about 15, 16 years ago accumulating Carcanos. And that's when I found out really there's not a lot of stuff published about them and the variations in that, and there's very little information. And when I started gathering them to get shootable examples to make the ammo, because it is hard to get the correct ammunition for it. That's when I initially started. I started to collect or accumulate the guns. And, that was before these were being brought in by the different companies here recently.
Oh, okay.
Royal Tiger, and the ones that all came into flood. So most of these guns I accumulated were in the country prior to that. From either the 50s, 60s, maybe the 80s. I believe there were some brought in. And then plus the fact that after the fall of communism, we have PPU, which is a Serbian, or used to be in Yugoslavia, and they're the only people that make the correct 6.5 brass and the correct bullets. Or no, they didn't make the 7.35. Hornady did. Which they currently stopped production.
Yeah.
So now that's out. But at that time, that's where I went and developed the load, and that is what most people are interested in, is good ammunition that shoots accurately out of these guns.
Yeah, I think it was Hornady had the 6.5, and they were like the bottle-nosed.
Yeah, they had the torpedo bullet.
Yep.
They dropped them, but they made the it's 300 caliber.
So they also made them too.
Excellent bullet, but those are out of production now also.
Man. Yeah, so I got started collecting Carcanos. I went to a gun shop in 2018, 2019 timeframe, and I had known a little bit about Carcanos. I'd not ever really seen one out in the wild, so I'd seen them at gun shows, but never really kind of looked at them. This was before Royal Tiger Imports got their batches of Carcanos in from Ethiopia. The gun shop owner had a big estate, and he had all these old guns, and I took a look at some of the Carcanos and asked him about them. He said,
"They're crap. You can't hit the broadside of the barn with them. They ain't worth anything."
And so I got them for really cheap. And I decided I was going to do a little bit more research. I just didn't have any books or anything. But I'd watched quite a few videos, been on some forums, was intrigued. I'd already joined a Facebook group about Carcanos. I know it was just a matter of time before I got one. But I started digging more into the Carcanos and realized that you can get really good accuracy out of them. So my research led me to conclude that there's a lot of misconceptions out there about Carcanos.
Yes, there are.
So this is pretty recent that people are starting to do, collectors, enthusiasts have done the research and like put together things. Tell us about these books here. What do we got?
Okay.
This is the first book here.
All right. This one here is Italy's battle rifle. I forget. There was a first version published, and this here, I think one of the authors signed it, 2021.
Oh, wow.
And it was very limited. You had to get on a list, and the hardcover books they made, and I made sure I got one. And you can, I guess, an ebook or something, it's still available. But I wanted a hard copy. And this one it's a little bit different, but this was made by collectors, and it's just jam full of photographs and that, and all kinds of information and numbers. But the one book that you should get, which is very good and comprehensive, and this is available on Amazon and that.
Yep, I've got the same one there. Yep.
The Carcano rifle. This here is done by some fellas in Italy. It takes you step by step through the history and all the different variations, models. And both of these books cover sniper rifles, grenade launchers, ammunition, accessories, and all that other stuff. So these are two very good reference books. This one you'll be able to find fairly easily. This one here, it was a limited production. If you notice, this is thicker because this gives you a brief synopsis of the gun, but is loaded with photographs because it was made by guys that were collectors. And so
awesome.
The two of these together, then this is how I actually gathered all my information and learned a lot from both of these books. And it was recently in life, back 20, 30 years ago, these reference material didn't exist. And I didn't even know the different variations all these years.
Yeah. Now, there are some rarities, and the books go into some of these rarities. And surprisingly, there are museums and collectors that have rarities of Carcanos. What would you say is the rarest Carcano in your collection?
Okay. The rarest Carcano that I would have is this post-war cavalry carbine, 38 style with a fixed sight, converted to 8mm Mauser. Now, these were made up from leftover components and sold to countries in the 50s that were short on firearms. And because the cavalry carbines are quite lightweight, and converting it to a 8mm Mauser, not a lot of them were done. So it would be difficult to find one of these. You can find the TS version fairly easily. Okay, so as far as what I have, that would be the most difficult gun to find or the rarest.
And the most difficult to find that I have is the Carcano Cavalry carbine, and it's a M38 in 735. You just don't find those too often, and Royal Tiger had them a little while back. They got them from Ethiopia. Not in the best condition, but it's still, I knew it was a gem, so I picked it up. Now, as far as other rare Carcanos.
Well, any sniper rifle from a lot of these countries would be hard to find. Probably something that would be extremely difficult outside of a museum would be a Carcano with a scope-mounted sniper rifle.
So I think in the books they reference that as the Fucile Modelo 1891 con Ottica.
Yes.
We're not going to go in depth with those sniper rifles here. Now, one that I actually got my hands on, I was able to see Uli out there, Royal Tiger Imports, got a huge stash of Ethiopian surplus, and within that surplus was a hard-to-find variation of the Carcano, and there's only about 40 left in the world in private collections and museums. But initially there was 100 made by Beretta, and it's the Moschetto Modelo 1891 Duca d'Aosta. So very rare variation of the cavalry carbine. Now there's two different variations of this. There's the officer model and the troop model, and they were used by the bodyguards that were assigned to protect the Italian viceroy in Ethiopia, Amadeo d'Aosta. Now these might be some of the harder ones to find, and I'm sure if those ones went at auction, they would go for a lot of money. But as we see here, these Carcanos that are coming into the country right now, and some of the ones that have already been in the country since the 50s and 60s, are fairly cheap. Why are they so cheap?
Well, because first off, finding the ammunition is tough. And how you would get sporting ammo in the old days, and I did find some back in the shop, back in the 70s. What they would do is take a military cartridge, pull a bullet off, dump out the powder, use the corrosive primer, and then load like a 125 grain soft point or something. And the different surplus gun sellers would sell that reloaded ammo with soft point bullets to hunt with the guns, which does not work well because the bullet's wrong diameter. I actually fired some of that stuff and it did some bizarre things. But that's what people did, and it was problematic. And there were plenty of other guns out there, Enfields or Mausers or even 7mm, which every ammunition company in the U.S. would make hunting ammo for. So that's why they were more popular.
Yeah.
And, the odd size bullet, the fact you had to use the clips in there. Without those metal clips, you can't operate the gun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And nowadays we're seeing 3D printed clips that are just single shot. You can just stick them into the Carcano magazine.
Mag block.
It's a mag block.
I did videos on them. They come in handy.
Ammo manufacturers not going to go out of the way to really manufacture these. And if they do, they're going to be expensive. Now there is Milsurp munitions, and I prefer Steinel ammo. I don't know if you have a preference on what you use or you just reload.
I don't.
Yeah, so there you go.
But, yes, and a lot of things, the problem with that is people complain, and I see, like, when these companies come out and they're making this ammo nowadays, it's $2 a round. And the misconception is the cost of doing this. Why is Carcano ammo more expensive than, say, 9mm? Because everybody and their brother, every police force, every military uses 9mm. So factories are set up to produce billions of rounds of it. Where something like 6.5 Carcano, they're only going to make enough because ammunition does have a shelf life. In other words, if you don't sell it in a few years, it can't sit on a shelf for 15, 20 years. Smaller runs means more setup time, and the odd bullet and everything is that, and it costs more. And a lot of people say, well, if you just stop buying it, then the price will come down. Well, that won't work. What will happen is if you stop buying it, the companies will just stop producing it. Unfortunately, this is an unusual gun. It uses an unusual diameter bullet, or I should say, the ammunition is non-standard. Okay, and this is what hinders it and makes the ammunition so expensive. And even in the old days, once the supplies that came in surplus with these guns post-World War II ran out, it's not worth having a gun you can't get ammo for, and that's why people did not really collect them years ago.
Interesting. Now, do you think new collectors nowadays should get a Carcano? And what are the models out there that maybe a collector would be looking for?
Yes. Well, the thing is, even with the ammunition costs, there are ways around it. But, like some of these here, I'll take one of my Troop Special. This one here, 1906. So this gun is well over 100 years old. It shoots well. It's nice. It's a piece of history. And, they're still around. They don't cost a ton of money, okay, as compared to what a KAR-98 or something does. And you can still find them reasonably. Granted, I've seen prices on all Milsurp guns go insane. I believe the long rifles, the M91s and was it M9140?
The 41s?
41s. Those were sold off quickly post-war to other militaries. These were kept because for years, even something as old as this you see in the 70s, the Italian riot police would put a grenade launcher on this and use them to launch tear gas. They were actually using these things within the police force up until recently, and that's why we have this influx of these guns. Now, I went to a gun show, and this is a standard, and you used to find a lot of these, the M91 long rifle, and a bunch of them you'll find have 1918, 1917, very common. So they must have had a batch of these who were in good shape and came in way back in the 50s. And this was typically the long Carcano you got. This one's in fairly nice shape, and this was not imported, and they're not bringing these in currently. It's just the Carbines. So now, when you go to a gun show, a gun like this, going back a ways, you used to buy these things for $150, $100, depending who you bought it from. They were 200 or under, say, 15, 18 years ago. And very few people weren't beating the door down to get them, okay? So I went to a gun show and seen one of these for $650 was a price tag or something like that, which they're common, they're around. That's why I tell people on my channel, don't ask me about prices, because, I don't know, somebody paid that much for one. To me, it's not worth it. But that's because I already have one. I paid about $200 for it. So, it's tough to say. But, if you're in your 20s, who knows, 20 years down the road what they'll be worth, ammunition or no ammunition. Like I said, these things are over 100 years old. So things go up historically, and collecting mil-surplus rifles is a popular hobby. So.
Yeah. And a lot of people say you better get them while they're cheap, because if you wait and the surplus has dried up that's currently being imported, then you're going to pay a higher price later on. And even at gun shows, I see some of the current surplus that I said, hey, that's what's at Royal Tiger right now for $189. The gun shows have them listed at like $380. I'm like, why? So now you can kind of foreshadow, use that as a foreshadowing, and you can say, okay, so when the surplus dries up, these gun show sellers are probably sitting on stashes of them, and they're going to try to sell them for like $350. Right now, the surplus that's getting imported into the country, we're seeing 1891 cavalry carbines.
Yes.
And maybe some of the TS carbines. I think Royal Tiger also had some TS carbines in there as well.
When the floodgates open, it's been 3 years. And
yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, what came in, they were all carbines. There were the 9124s, which were unusual. I had one example that was in very bad shape, and I thought that it was something about cutting down the rifle. It wasn't. The bore was shot out. Because when I got another example, and I made videos where I prove this, I've shot them, and they're just as accurate as anything else.
Yeah, I saw that video.
Yes.
I said, okay, I'm a believer now in the 9124.
And then the different ones, because that came in, so you had the variations, and then you got into cavalry carbines. Like I said, this one I have is another one, and it still has the original thing. This one here, 1901. So some of these guns that came in were over 100 years old.
Wow.
And, you know, they're still in good shape. All right. Granted, you will find some of them that are shot out. You know, that happens with any batch of surplus rifles, be it Mauser and Gans or whatever. There are going to be some guns that are worn out.
Yeah, and that's the risk that you take when it comes to military surplus. I think people just have this misconception that, oh, they're from a certain place, they've got to be bad because they're from this company. No, it's just a risk you take. It's a gamble. Other distributors also get them, source them from other countries, and it just depends what's in the batch. There's one here that you got that is interesting. Can you tell us more about this?
Yes. When I do my videos and I get a lot of people asking me questions about Carcano rifles, they will come up with something that even with the reference books and that, they can't figure out what it is. Because post-war, or very late war, this book mentions it, very late in the war, you have to remember that Italy, it was chaotic. They surrendered to the Allies. The Germans took over the country. You had partisans. Mussolini was on the run. The government was in turmoil. The military was in turmoil. So towards the end of the war, you will see a lot of Carcanos with no markings, like the fascist Roman numerals or the date or anything, and they were simplifying them as they went. But then again, you will find something highly unusual, and this is one I just bought. This was languishing in a gun shop for many years, and it's a 38 style gun. It has the fixed sight in the rear, but if you notice, the stock isn't like the standard one with the folding bayonet. This is some sort of, when they first were designing them, they had this style stock. This is an early stock. And I believe this was put together post-war. And it's like somebody varnished this and that. This may have been done in the 50s from spare parts. There's a serial number, a couple small stamps, and they even ground off the 6.5 he's supposed to have. So this may have been assembled by a surplus gun dealer or a company that sold them. And you'll find a lot of these, but you will find late war or post-World War II Carcano rifles that'll be in really nice shape, blue, and only have maybe a serial number without all the different markings on them. And a lot of people ask me about that, and there's no way. These books document from the government produced, not what somebody 15 years after the fact that was taking surplus guns and cranking them out and selling them in a magazine. Okay, you will find strange variations. Okay, and generally, if all the markings and that, it's a post-war gun that was built by somebody for someone. And there was something what a lot of people don't know is after World War II, the French built KR-98s and P-38s on captured or German machinery that was given to them as war reparations. And these guns did show up on the surplus market. The P-38s were called the Gray Ghosts. They were Parkerized, and the strange gray parkerization. They had serial numbers, and the only thing is there was a star stamped on the front of the frame. And for years, people didn't know what it was. Well, these countries covertly made these weapons with no markings on them, and they would either give them away or sell them to countries that were banned from buying on the open market, or they didn't want them to be traced to Germany, France, or anything else. So there was a lot of sterile weapons made post-World War II on the equipment. And this political intrigue and revolts and that. And then they usually end up on the surplus market and nobody knows what they are. You know, that's...
Yeah. Importers were doing all kinds of stuff back then. They were making sporterized weapons.
Yeah.
They were just trying to sell them. They could take a whole bunch of old World War II rifles and sell them and make a few bucks, and by doing like a simple like varnish or some kind of like restoration or something,
cutting down barrels, cutting the stock down,
putting a scope on stuff. Like you saw a lot of these with importer scopes.
Yep.
And it was in the magazines. It was on mail order. What about the variation that's in 8mm? Are those even safe to shoot?
Okay, there's a lot of questions on that. The books stated this, and the Germans they were single shots too. The Germans did convert them as an emergency thing, but again, that was a last-ditch effort, if they're safe or not. And those were rare. If you ever found one of those were quite rare. I remember back in the 70s to find those German converted ones. Now, the ones that I have were converted post-war, and they were done, I don't know if they were done by the Italians or by somebody else, but you have to remember, after the chaos of the war, Italy kind of came under NATO and they were being rearmed with U.S. weapons. So all of the Carcano weapons or any of the things that were incomplete in the different factories, people would come around and buy up barrels, parts, pieces, stocks, and they would go and fabricate something, and that 8mm version was one, and they would sell them to countries that needed arms, and a lot of them ended up in the Middle East, Egypt, and it says so in the book. I was just reading it, but I forgot. There was a lot of Middle Eastern countries that needed arms and would buy them. Now, when you look at it, a lot of people say to machine it out and get their 8mm bolt head, because it is a different bolt in there, you have to cut too much out of the receiver. Now, I have seen videos on YouTube of people shooting these guns, okay, with standard 8mm ammo. I don't know if it was civilian or not. But the variation in 8mm, to me, would be questionable, and I can't say it's safe. Okay, the best thing to do if you wish to fire them is to load a cast bullet with a very light load, okay, which is not that difficult to do, like you would in an 88 Gewehr, and you can enjoy it. Plus, also, I don't really know if anyone ever made the clips to hold 8mm ammo. The one book shows you how to take a 6.5 and cut it, split it, and all this, and cram these cartridges in there. But if you're doing all that with a Dremel tool and that, I don't know how effective or problematic that would be. I myself, when I take them out, now we've got them out of the dust here, I'll load up some cast bullets and I'll just use that mag block, and shoot them single shot, just to have some fun. But yeah, I will say avoid that. And actually in the book it said that a lot of those rifles, when they were imported into the United States, because of liability, the distributors were nervous and actually would snip the ends of the firing pins off so you couldn't fire them.
Yeah, interesting. Well, that brings up some of the different controversies surrounding Carcanos. What about the accuracy? A lot of people believe that Carcanos are inaccurate junk. What do you have to say about that?
Part of that is because they try to shoot the smaller diameter bullets, standard 6mm, and most of your ammunition is loaded with a 264 diameter bullet.
So PPU standard, like PPU does not have available loaded cartridges in a 267 diameter bullet. They only have a 264 diameter, but you can get PPU bullets that are in 267
as a reloading component only.
Yeah.
And why they do that, I don't know.
I would think it's liability. Yet again, I think we're falling back on liability.
But Hornady did load that ammunition with that 268 torpedo bullet. There were some issues with it, and they dropped the diameter a thousandths, and it worked out well. But once there was the problem with the jackets getting stuck because it was a soft point bullet in the gun, or they said that's what happened. I never really heard an article or anything, but people said that. But then again, it's like when I tell people, you know, a full metal jacket bullet will go down in a rough barrel. Okay, but if you put a soft point in any caliber, okay, and you got a barrel that's nasty, you could get the jacket stuck in there. Okay, that's just common sense. And a lot of people, they just want to shoot the gun irregardless, even though they know, well, hey, I got a deal. I bought it for $50, even though there's no rifling or anything in there. Yeah, that's why it's considered inaccurate. The second part of the inaccuracy is the sight system. Okay, people don't understand it. All firearms were made with what they call battle sights. And what that was is a soldier picked that rifle up, lined those sights up, and generally they were set, what we call it, 400 yards in the U.S., but that's about 300 meters. And a lot of these guns were set to that. And the whole idea behind it is when you're there shooting and you line that up, if you shoot at 400 meters, it will be at point of aim. Okay? If the individual is at 600 meters, then a bullet would drop down and hit them in the leg and wound them, which is kind of desirable because now you tie up two people to drag the man off the battlefield. And if he was closer, say 150 yards, if you aim center of mass, you would hit him up in the shoulder head area. So that is why these guns, that's why they're designed, that's what they do. They're not hunting rifles where everyone's used to going and shooting a little group with their scope or iron sights and having the controllability. Okay, and that's what people don't understand. And if you can't take a Carcano, you have that giant V-notch, okay, and you can actually, you have to remember how far down you drop it to hit point of aim at, say, 100, 150 yards. And even with a fixed sight, they're so wide. If it shoots to the left or the right, then all you would do is just always bring that sight blade over where it touches that V, and you can easily shoot them. But you have to be skilled with a rifle and Kentucky windage to do that, and a lot of people don't. Any ammunition's expensive. To be proficient, you must fire the rifle, and the ammunition's expensive, so a lot of people get frustrated. They can't learn the sights. It's hard for them to adapt or adjust to it, and the ammunition will bankrupt you by the time you get...
Yep, and one of the videos I saw on YouTube was Ernest Jimenez, and he set a Guinness World Record by shooting a 17-inch plate at 1,800 yards. I think it was 1,800 yards. I have to double check that. But consistently with his iron sights, and he had it set up. And so at that point I said, okay, well, if this guy's hitting the 17-inch plate at 1,800 yards with a Carcano 1891, there shouldn't be anything wrong with the accuracy. I don't know what this rumor is about the accuracy. So looking into the accuracy part, I found the same things you were talking about.
Yeah.
On forums, people were talking about this accuracy, that the bullet diameters are not correct, and the sight pictures. People have issues with the sight pictures at first.
But here's the thing, a lot of people buy one gun. Now, I bought the one gun. It had, no pits, no nothing. It's just the barrel was worn.
Oh, yeah. You also got to check the bore condition on them because, like, a lot of these don't have very good bore condition. And a simple way to do it, which is not the correct way to do it really, but it can get you, it can, like, prevent you from buying a crap gun at a gun show or gun shop. If you just carry a 6.5 bullet in a 2.67 diameter, you can use that to do a bullet test at the muzzle. And if it sinks all the way in, then you know that you're going to get very bad accuracy out of it because the muzzle end there is so worn that when that bullet comes out the muzzle end, it's going to destabilize.
Keyhole or do something.
Yeah, it's going to keyhole or it's going to go a little bit left, a little bit right. And I think that the muzzle wear is probably, on muzzle wear and Carcanos, probably affects accuracy more than a lot of other rifles out there.
Well, some of them, the bores are worn out. And if they're that crappy of a gun, how did it get to the point where somebody shot the bore out shooting it so much?
Yeah, there's that aspect as well. Now, I get them if they're from Ethiopia, they're using corrosive ammunition, and obviously over time it probably corroded enough. But as far as some of the Italian surplus that we're seeing right now, the bore condition on those are actually pretty good. I'd say they're good to excellent, and I haven't seen one that was very bad yet. I've gotten 4 from the recent Italian surplus, and they've been good to excellent.
Well, there's a few people that have had some, of course, keyhole, but, you know, they're using the wrong diameter bullet. Okay, and if you have one that is in super mint condition, people kind of tell you, well, the accuracy's okay. You can, if the bore is like perfect, you can have the smaller diameter bullet shoot somewhat all right.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And one of the Carcanos I have has an excellent bore. I was shooting at 100 yards, no problem with PPU's 264. Now, if I was to probably go to 200 yards, that probably would be a different story.
Yeah, your spread would be.
Yeah, the spread would be a lot wider. So given that we know that the accuracy of the Carcano is actually pretty good, do you think that Lee Harvey Oswald or multiple people or somebody used a Carcano? Do you think a Carcano was used during the JFK assassination?
Honestly, no. Okay. What's a rig? And I remember watching the TV show where they had a guy, they took Carcanos and they got the right model. They had that scope and the mount.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there was a guy that made the shots and they said, yes, it could be done and that. For numerous reasons, I don't really want to get into, okay? Just being in the military and knowing what covert things and assassinations, and the Zapruder film does have evidence in there. Somebody shot the man from a totally different angle than a damn bookstore, so no.
Without really bringing in conspiracies and just going off the fact that we know what the rifle is capable of, is it possible that this rifle could have been used in that assassination? I would say yes, it is a possibility. The distances weren't that great. Some say that, the scope is the worst scope. It's like you could bend it in different directions. You're going to have parallax. Well, you also have to think maybe he just didn't use a scope either. He could have just used iron sights because the scope was offset. Maybe he just used a scope for a target identification, or somebody used a scope for a target identification. So I would say, this is possible. So that brings up the magic bullet theory. The bullet went through JFK and then went through the governor and it bounced off of his limbs and eventually lodged in.
Through his wrist and into his leg or something, yeah.
Yeah.
And they asked when he passed away if they could remove that bullet fragment, and the family said no.
Oh, wow.
Okay, that's another thing. Another interesting thing, if you watch the conspiracy things, how they proved that it was the Carcano that did it, is when they took the president, the confusion in it, to the hospital. Mm-hmm. Supposedly somebody found a fired bullet on the gurney.
Yeah, that's very
And
odd.
that is what they used. It wasn't deformed or nothing, and it was fired out of that rifle. Okay, and they just found it lying on the gurney. Okay, there's a lot of holes in the story, and kind of don't want to get into it because I made the mistake of making a video for some people that were really in depth in this and studying the court transcripts and everything. And they asked me how many cartridges would fit into a Carcano. I made a very short video and showed them, I actually took the trigger mechanism out, showed them how it locks in there. And I said, that's it. That's the way it works. You can't get any more than what is in the little clip package, 6 rounds. You can't get it out. And what it was is just somebody slipped up when they asked the question, does the gun hold so many rounds? And the police officer said yes. It's just they didn't know, and people were not familiar with these old design guns.
Definitely, yeah. So we're coming out of World War II. Not everyone's a gun expert. There's all these foreign military rifles and smokeless powder that are flooding the country in surplus. And even some of the importers didn't know what these were. They were mislabeling them, misidentifying them.
Yeah, so that's the thing about all of this.
And just because somebody has military experience or police experience doesn't mean they're an expert on a specific weapon system that was used by a foreign military. I guess if you were some kind of special operative and you specialized in that kind of field, then you would know. But for the general guy, he probably wouldn't know.
It's true. And that's where a lot of confusion comes up with a lot of things.
Yep. But kind of going back to the penetration power of a 6.5 Carcano bullet, I did some tests at my buddy's place at Gunpowder Acres, and we tested out the penetration of different bullets. And then one day we said we should test out the 6.5 Carcano. And so we did. And the first test, the bullet would go through about 18 inches of wood planks, 1-inch wood planks, and it would disappear. It would go out the side, go out the bottom. So we had to line it up with planks on the side as well. And what we found was that the penetration was around 30 inches. And that's when one of the wood planks finally would stop the bullet. And so we pulled it out, and it was actually in really good shape. We tried PPU, and we also tried Steinel ammo brass rounds. And we were just very surprised that the bullets were in that great of condition for going through that much wood and kind of going sideways. We tried 30-06 just to see what a 30-06 would do, a military surplus 30-06 round. And that went through probably around, I think it went around 10 inches or so, maybe 15 inches. And it just misformed the brass jacket. The bullets were just deformed. So in that aspect, yes, when people bring up the magic bullet, it's in perfect condition. Is that possible? Yes, from our tests that we conducted, it's possible. Now, I don't have the exact bullet that was used during that or that was found during that in the Warren report, and I don't have actual surplus 6.5 Carcano to test out that penetration test. So, yeah, I would say it's possible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I ain't gonna argue with you. You did the test. I didn't.
Yep.
I've never done anything like that or, experiment even with my own ammo.
But you've shot a lot of Carcanos, so you can kind of vouch for the reliability of it. What kind of issues do you deal with, and what do you think the reliability in general is on them?
Well, one thing that it does, the cartridge was never designed. See, that's another thing about the sights. It has kind of a rainbow trajectory.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that all the old cartridges, if you look at every single one, from the 1880s to the 1890s, they all had a torpedo bullet. Even the first 30-06 cartridges had that torpedo bullet, the 30-40 Krag, all of them. Okay, and like I said, it was a holdover. Okay, and so these bullets, that's why they went with the spire point. Mm-hmm. It's not that effective in terms of trajectory. Okay, so that's one shortcoming. It's not a powerful cartridge. I think it's only 42,000 PSI or something is the pressure where, 30-06 and that, the pressures are way up there, in terms. And the only other issue I had, a lot of people see that, is when the clips get bent, they're only supposed to be used once and disposed of. When they get worn, you'll get malfunctions because the sheet metal clips all goofed up. And or what happens is a lot of times you'll see when I'm shooting it, a bullet will stand straight up. And that has something to do, I guess, with also the clip and it popping out. And, no big deal. But
yeah, I've dealt with surplus clips, and those seem to work really well until you accidentally leave them in your gun range bag, and that gets tossed around your car a little bit, and then they get bent, and then now the next time you go to the range, they start having issues. Yeah.
But yeah, that's about it. But, other than that, the way the weapon's designed, using the correct, but that's an expendable part of the thing, and it's also a hassle that you need that or the gun does not function.
Yeah.
And see, that's another problem, is if you don't have a clip and you try to just throw a bullet in the chamber, you're going to make that extractor
open up to jump.
It's going to break.
Yeah.
It has to be fed up, slide in, and that's a problem with it.
Other than that, I mean, I think there's a misconception around there that some say that the Carcanos blow up, or that might have been from the 8mm Mauser conversions.
The only one I've seen blown up is somebody went and took one and converted it to a different caliber, and a guy made a video on YouTube where he put something in it and exploded the rifle. Had they blown up, a lot of those stories come from the fact that people don't know the caliber. And I've heard of people putting 8mm and 7mm Mauser and firing it and living through this.
Oh, wow. Crazy.
One guy told me the story, well, my dad took it out and he went and he put this in there and he went to shoot it and that thing exploded, and that, that's putting the wrong ammo in.
Yeah. So, yeah, some people might spread those stories around and they were just using the wrong ammo and they were forcing the wrong ammo in the chamber.
Or if you have a bore obstruction, you get some old surplus gun and don't clean it, you start stuffing ammo in there.
Yeah, that's true too, yeah.
Yeah, that can happen with any gun, but yeah.
Another issue that I had, one time I was having issues just kind of with everything. And I said, this is weird, I'm having all these issues. It just, like stuff wasn't extracting right, the bolt was really coarse, rough, and I took it apart and, the spring was broken. It had rusted so much that it broke in half and kind of compacted on itself, so it wasn't very springy. And the trigger mechanism has that one spring, so everything kind of relies on that.
Yeah, because that's going to release your sear.
But as far as reliability, I mean, I haven't had many issues except for that spring with the Carcanos. I like shooting them. I like going to the range when I can. And I've taken them out to the Talladega Marksmanship Park at 600 yards. I took a Finnish marked M38 and 735 with Steinel ammo. Now, it wasn't the best sight picture it wasn't the best grouping by any means for any rifle, but it was still somewhat of a grouping there. And a lot of the Finnish say they didn't like the Carcanos.
Yes, that was true. That's why they're like in beautiful mint condition. I guess they were given them. Yeah,
so the Finns during the Continuation War, if I recall, needed more rifles. So they worked, they were technically part of the Axis powers, or they were aligned with the Axis powers. And so that was Germany and that was Finland. And that was Germany and that was Italy. And because the Germans and Italians were also involved in their own conflict, they didn't really have a lot to spare out for another country. So they ended up selling Finland a whole bunch of M38s and 735.
Yeah, that's how they got rid of them.
Yeah. And I think one reason why the Finnish didn't really like the M38s and 735 is because they were used to the Mosin Nagant and that platform, and they were actually used to rifles with superior accuracy. They actually made modifications to the Mosin rifles that they had and that they bought to make them more accurate. They changed the sights, they changed the barrels, they put heavy barrels, they put shims.
Step barrels.
Step barrels.
And that's the downfall of these old 1891 designs, the thin barrels. Because if you start firing any of these, or an early Mauser and Dan with a thin barrel, you overheat them, and M95s, same thing. When they heat up after 2-3 clips, it changes, it warps the barrel because the barrel's thin.
Yep. And when they got these M38s, there wasn't too much enthusiasm over them, and they knew that they weren't used to the platform, they weren't used to the sights, and a lot of what you hear from stories, because that's really, I mean, there's not a lot of documentation on it. So what you do find on forums, stories, and the documentation that does exist is that the general consensus in Finland was that the M38 was not a very good rifle. Very few stories I have read, though, that said somebody's father, grandfather was in Finland and was a support troop, liked the rifle because of its small design, and they were in a support role, so they weren't really using a lot.
We have one right here.
Yeah, there we go.
These are actually, of all my Carcanos, this design's my favorite. It's lightweight, and yes, you know, you have to get used to the sights. It's a very simple sight. For somebody used to something like what the Finnish had, with adjustable sights, you know, and that, to them, this would suck. Okay?
Yeah.
And that's what it is. So they didn't like the design. But as a combat rifle, out of all the Carcanos, this is the one to replace all three of them. This one fit the bill. But the reason they made, again, it was politics. Why did they make the 9141? Somebody in the government just couldn't have them just change all the rifles to this model. So they still made them make the long version. They changed the sights on them and shortened them a couple, 2.5 inches or 3
Yeah, from the
inches.
1891 pattern, they shortened them just a little bit. Yeah.
Even though whatever the soldiers like or what's practical, you'll see that governments, politics, and money, you know, they don't usually, for the military, take the most practical solution that there is.
So when we think about the development of the Carcanos, we say that, hey, yeah, this is probably the best Carcano platform that was probably ever made.
Yeah.
Now, there's also the Type I. The Type I was made for the Japanese. Do you think that the Type I, with its like Mauser-style magazine system, is superior to the M38?
So you got a Japanese similar design rifle, and they have this open bridge receiver, and it's just the magazine is different. It's basically you got a Carcano style receiver for the Japanese stripper clips. You have a Carcano straight bolt, like I said, with the split back end of the receiver. And it does have a bolt stop on there. Put it to you this way. The advantage of the Type I is this works with an enclosed box magazine. So if you had 2 cartridges and no clip, you could load this rifle and use it.
Yeah.
Okay. Or reload it. Say you fired a few rounds, you can pop some in there, where you can't do it with this. Okay. So that's the advantage. As for what's superior in terms of, they're both quality guns.
Yeah.
They both shoot well.
Yeah. And the Type I is in 6.5 Japanese.
Japanese, yeah.
Yeah. Now, remember, I don't know if you know, but just to brush you up on a little history here, the Japanese Navy needed rifles, and so they got with Italy, and Italy provided a few designs from their Carcano platform, and the Japan picked one, and that's what we have, the Type I.
Another interesting variation in line of Carcanos.
Yeah,
you know?
And these were brought in usually by World War II soldiers after World War II had ended, when a lot of these got surrendered, or even after some islands were taken over, some of these were found. So the majority of surplus of these you'll see today are going to be, of the Type I's, will just be like war trophies from the Pacific.
Yep.
So compared to other rifles, let's do a comparison here. 1891, Let's see. In the early 1900s, I want to say Italy was involved in a few wars. There was the Italo-Abyssinian War, and then there was I don't think too many Carcanos were involved in that. Then there was the Italo-Turkish War. So let's just say from around the 1890s to 1910s, was the Carcano a good rifle during that era compared to other military rifles?
Well, by 1910, it was probably starting to get obsolete. Mauser 98, even though a lot of countries were using the older Mauser designs with different magazines and different style bolts, the 98 became supreme. The British had the Lee Enfield, which was a stand-up gun. 1903, we started with the Springfield 30-06, but it was not a game changer because it took us years to arm our troops with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
So, yeah, to say it's still the Carcano, it still was the Mannlicher style magazine, which was a very popular and proven magazine. The downfalls is the clip, and in fact, the open bottom gets dirt and debris, which creates problems. But it depends what are you stacked up against. In the Turkish War, were they still using single shot guns or black powder weapons, or were they armed with the new, more modern Mauser?
Yeah, they were armed with the Mausers. I think most of them were armed with Mausers.
All right, so yeah, you're already falling behind by then, by 1910. And that's what they said. They went into World War I unprepared with, actually, not just World War I. They went into World War II carrying the same gun. They didn't change over.
Yep. The same platform, same style, action, just M38. But yeah, so World War I kicks off. You have a lot of, I think, in my opinion, I think that the Italians probably used a good rifle for World War I. Though the platform itself was already pretty much outdated. They were fighting a lot in the mountains, and having that 6.5 flat shooting cartridge was probably somewhat of an advantage. Though it was not really the problem with the 6.5 caliber, and the Japanese also did this as well. They were using 6.5 for a little bit, and then they wanted to go to 7.7. What both countries found out was the 6.5 really wasn't doing enough damage to take somebody out. It wasn't doing enough damage to kill somebody. A lot of times it would wound somebody, and it over-penetrated, the Carcanos did. And so that's one reason why they started looking to develop, the Italians did, 7.35s.
Because, yes, just about every country that had it kind of got rid of it. The Italians still had the 6.5, and the Dutch carried through with the 6.5.
Now, the only reason the Italians, I think we touched on this earlier, the only reason the Italians really kept the 6.5 was because of logistical issues when trying to convert all these rifles, trying to produce all these rifles and arm all these troops spread around Africa, Italy, and elsewhere with a new caliber and a new rifle that took that caliber to 7.35.
Well, yeah, take it back, too, because the Swedish kept their rifles.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yep.
And that was an effective gun. It was, the Mauser design. But then again, these countries, the Dutch and the Swedes, really didn't get into heavy combat or multiple wars.
Right. So, like, a lot of the Swedish rifles weren't really known for combat use. Now, Finland did use some Swedish rifles during the Winter War, I believe, or the Continuation War, or both. But it really wasn't in large numbers. They didn't have a larger. And really, they were just using them in, like, port cities, if I remember right, against the Russians. So, yeah, if you ever find a Swedish Mauser with an SA stamp on it, they're pretty hard to find. Not too many of them exist out there.
I don't mind. The 3 I have, I don't have that on there.
Yeah, I don't have one of those either. Yeah. But they are out there from reading up on stuff. But 6.5 caliber, World War II happens, outdated cartridge. platform of the Carcano, outdated. By this time, the U.S. military had adopted the M1 Garand, and that had pretty much changed and revolutionized warfare for the basic infantry soldier. And after that, bolt action started going away. At the dawn of semi-automatic rifle adoption as a standard service rifle, the Italians were still using this. Yeah, they were behind the curve, yeah. So Carcanos are currently being imported into the States. Royal Tiger Imports has them. They have them from Ethiopia and Italy. The ones from Ethiopia, they weren't stored in the best conditions.
Right.
They were in large warehouses exposed to the elements. They had all kinds of animals like chickens and goats and birds running on top of them and defecating on them. So they're not going to be in the best condition. And they were probably shot with corrosive ammo and then not cleaned when they were stored.
Yes.
Now the ones from Italy, those ones are in pretty good shape.
Yes, I have several. I mean, actually, several of the ones I drawn out here, I acquired from like PSA, several different.
Yeah, J&G Sales had them still, I think.
And when they first came out, I bought them several different places. And they're typically guns that were put away years ago and stored. Sometimes you'll find one that rusted because it was exposed or something, but generally they were all in fairly good shape. I guess because the Italians did use some of them for police use, where they attached grenade launchers and would launch tear gas with them or something, or for whatever reason these guns were stored all these years. So, yes, most of the ones from Italy, I'd say, are in good, very good to excellent condition.
Given that we know that there's an abundant supply of surplus right now coming in, Carcano surplus coming in, I've seen them anywhere from like $190 to about $300. Should collectors get them now?
Yeah, I mean, like I was explaining earlier, the models and types that are not being imported have skyrocketed in price because now people are saying, well, hey, I got a carbine or a cavalry carbine. I'd like a long rifle. So this is driving the price of these guns, which are not being imported, up. And in general terms, a firearm, a military rifle that is complete, with a good bore, that is shootable, that, has complete stock and everything. Maybe it's missing a cleaning rod or something like that, but a complete gun, it's about $300 is a fair price for any Milsurp gun, okay? Especially bolt-action ones.
Yeah.
Like I said, some of these things are over 100 years old.
And to mitigate any bad bores, I usually opt for bore condition. I usually pay a little extra, do the little selection there to get a hand select bore. So that way I know I'm getting something that's most likely going to be shootable. Other places that you can find Carcanos, you can find them at your gun shows, gun shops. You'll find all the different models out there. Right now, the current ones I think we're seeing are the TS and the cavalry carbines. Maybe some of the other ones like the 1891s. I think Royal Tiger has the Ethiopian 1891s and the M38s and 735 also.
Well, in other places, you go to some local auctions, at least in this state, just about any local auctions usually has firearms in it. And I remember going to some place out in the middle of nowhere and going through all these antiques and junk and building material. There was a Carcano cavalry carbine, but the only thing is I already had some and I didn't want to stay that late into the auction to where they got to that lot to see what it went for.
Yeah, you can also check estate sales. I've gotten some really good deals at estate sales. The thing is the timing on estate sales, because they usually start on a Friday morning, and most people work on Friday morning, so you just got to take some time off, or if you have time off, then you can check them out. But yeah, that's pretty much basically what you guys need to know about the controversies surrounding the Carcanos and just a little bit of history and importance that and just the misconceptions out there. So hopefully you guys learned something. Be sure to comment in the comment section Also, check out the TheKoba49's channel. I was watching his channel before I bought Carcanos because he had a lot of information about all these different weapon systems from the 1800s, and I was just soaking up all this knowledge. So yeah, he's been making a lot of Carcano videos for, seems like forever, but
Yeah, for quite a few years.
Yep. So he's got a lot of knowledge on reloading. He's got a lot of knowledge on ammo. He's got a lot of knowledge on a lot of different rifles that you just are getting harder to find.
Yeah, so go to my channel, hit search. I do have some playlists, so you can check those out that cover different guns. I really don't know if I have a Carcano one. I think I might. A lot of stuff I compiled over the past 10 years on YouTube.
Wow.
Okay, so the reason I made them is to help people out. So if you get a chance, check them out, subscribe, you know.
Pulverize that like button and subscribe if you haven't. And as I always like to say, be sure to learn history and curate history. Make it a great day.